Hello, friends, and welcome. I'm your co-host, Andrew Lazaga, here with Dubside.
And you're listening to the Dubcast with Dubside.
So in our last episode, you had a recording of Brian Schultz at TAX, the Traditional Arctic Kayak Symposium.
Yes.
TAX was started by John Peterson.
Yeah, the California John Peterson, not the Greenland John Peterson.
Yeah.
But yeah, that event went for, I believe it was 5 years, maybe 5 or 6 years, just that run that much, and then it ended. I think they used to bill it as the only traditional event in the U.S. that was on the open coast, which was true. They had,
Yeah.
Delmarva is sort of in a bay, and Styx is inland, and the Michigan and Minnesota ones are, even the South Carolina one would be a lake in Florida, but they're right on the bay, and that one moved up and down the California coast here and there. Like they maybe once it was at the same location twice, but other times they would move it as far up as near Arcata and then down by, was it San Francisco? I don't know. It moved around a little bit.
How many times did you go to TAX?
I went to all of them.
Oh, wow.
I could check on my logbook. Yeah, I believe every single one. I was there from the beginning to the end.
I went to the one that was held in Trinidad, which is
Yeah.
Ellen Wilson's old neighborhood.
Yeah.
And
Well, it was different from the other events. That being on the coast, you've got real surf conditions.
yeah,
To get out through, and I remember teaching rolling, and if it kicked up a little bit, with the challenge to get out through the surf before you can even start to work on the rolling stuff. So it was some nice change from the tame little lakes that we've had.
Yeah, that was
places.
the real attraction to TAX. Trinidad is a fantastic playground for sea kayaking
Oh yeah,
because it has the bay south of Trinidad Head that's usually protected from the northwesterly winds and is filled with rock gardens. North of Trinidad Head, there are a few good surf beaches, but the main feature is called Smack Wall, where the waves crash into the vertical cliffs of Trinidad Head. If you get close enough to the cliffs, you can surf the waves reflecting off of the wall there.
I remember being in there, not out where that is, but closer into the bay there. We're just walking, we're paddling around through the rock gardens, and I started paddling in Philadelphia, so I don't have the the eyes of the beach bum who can just look and see exactly what the waves are doing and knowing what's going to happen and what has happened. But we're floating around in there. We're playing in some areas, and I'm as I recall, it was John Peterson who was paddling with us. This is the TAX John Peterson, California John Peterson, and I was sort of gliding into one little spot and just hanging out there, and he comes over and he said, "Oh, Dubside, you just need to know, you're not in a good spot there. That's a dangerous place to be." And I'm just thinking, what? It's flat. He knew that a big, huge wave forms right there. And that is not the place to just hang out at. But I had no idea. But that was some good local knowledge I had to pay attention to.
I first met John at Corey's skinboat school.
Uh-huh.
And it was just this random meeting. I had been paddling up in the San Juan Islands and had heard about the skinboat school and decided to just drop in and take a look around. Corey was gone, but John was there, so he showed me around, and he had a couple beautiful kayaks already there.
Yeah, well, that's what everybody always says that about John Peterson. I remember first meeting him at Styx, and he would show up with these kayaks that he had built. They were just exquisite. He'd have like leather seats and parts inside it, and all the deck lines and everything. It was really well done.
Yeah, he used to carve these toggles out of bone.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Antlers, and they were carved into shapes of seals and whales and walruses. I mean, he was really an inspiration for me when I started building my kayaks, but I couldn't get anywhere close to doing the same thing that he did. I liked TAX. It was a really good event. That's where I met the Alaska kayak builder, Mitch Pauling. And Mitch gave such an amazing presentation that year.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that. He was encouraging people to go to one of those remote Aleutian islands where they were teaching some kids, about the original kayaks. The school has a thing like if the enrollment of the school gets below, what was it, 15 people, they close the school. And the school was currently had like 18 or 20 people enrolled. It was like that close. I thought, yeah, maybe I should go there, and help out, add what contribution I can make. Except that it cost, probably more than going to Greenland, and it took place the same time when the Greenland competition was held that year. So I was going to the Greenland competition, so that ruled it out for me. So I never pursued that, unfortunately.
That would have been cool. After that presentation, about a year or so later, I looked him up because he lives up here in Port Townsend, and interviewed him and made a short documentary about his efforts to revive the kayak building tradition in Alaska. That's my short documentary, The Last Baidarka of Prince William Sound, which I'll put a link in the show notes if anybody's interested.
All right.
All right. So on to number 34.
Yeah, sometimes it is possible to be maybe too good at what you do. Then you have to decide how you're going to proceed with that. That's kind of the subject of this Dubcast. Welcome to the Dubcast with Dubside. This is Dubcast number 34. And the topic here is the dilemmas faced by competitive athletes at the top of their game. And with a subject like that, it's going to be hard not to mention Maligiaq Padilla, which I will do. But we'll also cover a guy named Inuk Sigstad and a woman named Karen Knight. And that will include a description of interpretive freestyle canoeing. I have music from a group called the Olsen Kids, who recorded a number of CDs years ago when they were kids, and were a big hit among the children of Greenland. So sea kayaking has a long history going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. But in this country, in the continental U.S., first there was canoeing. And the indigenous peoples developed canoes. They were traditionally made of birch bark. And if you're going to go down rivers or try to go up rivers, you are naturally, in this country or any country, going to run into, at some point, rocks and rapids. And the way today we have pushed the envelope on how big a rapid you can go over and the skill level it takes to negotiate those things, I would imagine that the indigenous peoples also pushed the limit on what they could do, but they were not stymied by the daring or the nerve, what it takes to go over big, serious rapids. I bet it was more to do with the equipment and the materials. In building your skills to take on the big rapids, you're going to be banging and scraping rocks quite a bit, and a birch bark canoe is not going to hold up very long. It's also quite difficult, if not impossible, to mold birch bark into the kinds of shapes and sizes that we have the modern whitewater kayaks you see today. At some point, after Westerners took to canoeing, they developed one of the sub-disciplines of the sport, and it was where you take a canoe and, usually doing it to music, you dance like it's ballet on the water. And this became known as interpretive freestyle canoeing. When done by an expert, it really is like dancing on the water. You take an open canoe and you kneel in the middle of it, and then with a paddle, just pushing it in the water certain ways, you can get the boat spinning around and carving turns and leaning way over to the side, and it's an amazing display of fluid motion set to music. Well, the organized canoe associations
formed this into a competitive event. And over time, you had specially designed equipment for this pursuit, and you had its own language, names for different maneuvers that were done, its own vocabulary, making interpretive freestyle canoeing another sub-discipline of the overall paddle sports activities. In about the middle 1990s, a woman distinguished herself in interpretive freestyle canoeing and became the reigning queen of the sport. And this is Karen Knight. I first met Karen in South Carolina at the Charleston Symposium. At the Saturday night on-water display, she would do her freestyle routine, which was always a highlight of the show. Now, Karen is a very nice person to be around, just a delightful personality. She's only, I don't think she's even 5 feet tall, just a little thing. And she teaches canoeing and kayaking. She got certified as a yoga instructor during the time that I knew her. And I always made an effort to get up early in the mornings to get to the yoga classes in Charleston. It was such a pleasure to see her bright and early in the morning. After about the year 2000, Karen stopped competing in freestyle canoeing. And it was not because she couldn't do it physically anymore. She was quite fit and active. It wasn't because other people got better than her. It was actually because no one got better than her. She came to the conclusion that she was holding back the sport because no one else was even close to her abilities. No one could come up with a routine to match hers. And I think it was discouraging other people from competing. So for the good of the sport, she stepped aside and let other people take over in the competition. Quite a noble thing to do. Well, in Greenland, they have the Kanat Greenland Kayak Association that runs the competition. And overseeing that, there's a group called the Greenland Sports Federation that they administer and fund all the other sports as well as the kayaking. And sometime about, it was maybe 2013 or so, the Greenland Sports Federation took somewhat more of an active interest in the kayaking pursuits. And they sent a guy around just to monitor and see what was going on. I think they were taking some initiatives and seeing how they could improve things, I suppose. During this time, I was able to talk to one of the administrators of the Greenland Sports Federation, and we had a conversation about how the kayaking was going, and without trying to be the foreigner telling them what they should or shouldn't do. I was just trying to get a handle on his perspective on things. And he told me that looking at it with a big picture view, if you have somebody who always wins, it takes away the element of suspense. If everybody knows, this guy is going to win, there's no real, drama going on there. She says, well, that's a given. If you have two or more competitors evenly matched, then it makes for an exciting competition to watch. And I thought about that, and he didn't say any names specifically, but obviously Maligiaq was the guy who wins every time he competes. And in 2013, he had, 8 or 9, I don't know how many titles, you lose track. But it was always a given. If he's going to compete, he's going to win the men's title. That's it. So Maligiaq won the first time in 1998, and then he was in the U.S. in 1999, and then 2000 he won, and then 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, just every year he would win. And at that point, that had been like 4 or 5 years, that's sort of the amount of time that Karen Knight had racked up championships. And Maligiaq could have stepped away at that point. And thinking back on it, I find that he was leaning in that direction. And he had announced that he wanted to look into other other sports, other pursuits, such as the triathlon or a marathon, those sorts of things, because he had tremendous athletic ability. And I think looking at kayaking overall, Greenland-style kayaking, his abilities were bigger than that. He had become the sort of the celebrity of the field, larger than life. But you can't really make a career out of Greenland-style kayaking competing anyway. I mean, you can, as he's done, build kayaks and do workshops and things and make some money. But unlike, say, a sport such as tennis or golf, you can make a living if you're that good just playing in tournaments. And that can be a healthy career at the top of the game. And I think back then in 2003, 2004, it was maybe somewhat boring for Maligiaq. I win this thing every time, and all I get is these trophies I take home. I don't get any big money, but is there more I can do here? I remember one year we were hanging out in Inuk, Greenland's capital, and we're down by the waterfront, the old part of town. There's the museum and the original church, and there's a house along there. And we're walking on the road, and this a guy in the house getting in his car or something like that. And Maligiaq goes, talks to him for a minute and comes back. And I didn't realize, but Maligiaq told me that house, it's a prime piece of real estate there, right on the shoreline of the oldest part of town. Well, that house happens to be the equivalent of the Greenland White House. That is where the Prime Minister stays. And the guy getting in his car at the time was Kupik Kleist, the Prime Minister of Greenland. So I suppose Maligiaq's tremendous success in competing in the kayak competition didn't get him huge sums of money, but it did get him on a first-name basis with the Prime Minister. Well, despite Maligiaq's plans to go into other athletic pursuits, as things worked out, it didn't quite happen that way. He was, as chronicled in my Modern Greenland Kayaking DVD that you can see, Andrew has posted online somewhere, he was injured in 2006 and had to not compete, though he'd been planning to that year. And he wasn't ready to compete in 2007. and 2008 he came back. And so he had to step back for some of that, and then he came back. And years after that, he had moved to Alaska, and though he wasn't ready to step back from competing, I think some of the others in Greenland would have been happy to have him step back so they could have a chance. And I remember the one year he came to compete from Alaska, and they put him in the international category. It was kind of like that time Sherry Perry came in 2004, and they wouldn't let her compete in the Greenlandic class. And so they said, well, you're not living in Greenland, so you have to compete as the international class. And he was like, what do you mean? I'm still a Greenland citizen, but they wouldn't hear that. So they would call his name in the first place in the international class, and he didn't even want to go up and get his medal. He says, come on, you guys can't do that to me. but they did. So and then other years they said, okay, that wasn't correct. Yeah, you can compete as a Greenlander. So it kind of went back and forth. And on the other hand, if he had just abandoned kayaking completely and gone into marathon running, we would have lost such a great resource and treasure in the sport itself. I mean, he's done so much to advance kayaking, so we can be thankful for that. Well, the last time I was in Greenland, it was 2018, so I'm a little out of touch with the current situation as far as who the top competitors are. And I don't know if for lack of a better term, next Maligiaq has become apparent yet. I'd like to tell you about someone who was in a similar situation to Maligiaq and made a different choice. And that is Inuk Sigstad. Now, Inuk first competed in 2004 when he was just 10 years old. And even though this was approximately 10 years after Maligiaq had started competing, Inuk, like Maligiaq, distinguished himself quite early on the rope gymnastics. Now, both of these two people have that lean build. They're small-framed people, but it's all solid muscle. And that strength-to-weight ratio really comes into its own on the ropes. And looking over the numbers, they both started pretty slow the first time, but within a couple of years, we're passing the 200-point mark and then getting up to 400 points. And Maligiaq's top score of 500 points took him, he was 21 years old when he got that, but Inuk was hitting 400 when he was 14 years old. Very impressive. Now, there were some other contemporaries at the time I'll tell you about later. You can see some of this in the Modern Greenland Kayaking DVD. Among his peers, Inuk stood out as the one with the strongest seal hunter's demeanor. By that I mean very quiet, very reserved, never boastful or ostentatious, but he let his skills speak for themselves. Both of Inuk's parents were quite involved in the kayak club. His father, Morten, spoke English, and his mother, Ida, also spoke English. Inuk had a younger brother and a much younger sister, but I don't think the kids were conversational in English. And I think the father, Morten, had a job in it might have been the fire, the rescue department, something like that, some government position, working for the Sysimiut township. And one of the years that the competition was held there, 2011, I got an invitation from Ida and Morten to come to their house for dinner one night. Sysimiut is a smaller town than Nuuk. It's about 3,000 people or so. And like Greenland towns, it's got a harbor, and the rest of the town sort of radiates off from that. One side of the harbor has this promontory on it, and there's this yellow house that sits right on top of that, a commanding view of the whole harbor. I mean, most houses in Greenland have a very nice view. It's a scenic place, but this house is just the one you'd pick to be the Prime Minister's residence if the Prime Minister lived in Sysimiut. So when they invited me to dinner, it became apparent that is the Sigstad residence. It's not a huge house, not a palace, but it's got probably the most desirable location in the whole town. Well, as I mentioned in a past Dubcast, you don't own real estate in Greenland, and in years after that, the Sigstad family went elsewhere. They didn't have that house forever. But during the time they did, it was a very nice house, this little white fence around it. And so I went there for dinner and had a nice evening talking to them. It sounded like this.
We will take a rope from other side here. And
that was done in 2006, right?
And put the Royal Atlantic lines.
So Ida and Morten speak in Greenlandic to each other, and Morten is nice enough to switch over to English to speak to me. And seeing that the Sigstads were people of some means, they had hooked up the opportunity for Inuk to go to school in Denmark. He was 17 years old at the time. And for any Greenlander who's young and got their whole life ahead of them, the opportunity is all in Denmark. The way the Danish government is set up, for Greenlanders, higher education does not cost anything. And I remember Maligiaq, having spent some time in the U.S. and getting familiar with the situation here, had tried to impress his friends back in Greenland. He said, look, you can go to school, do that. That's in the U.S. you have to pay money for that. I suppose some people just took it for granted, I'll go to school, maybe I won't go to school, I don't know, I'll think about it. But in this country, the cost of it is a big obstacle for a lot of prospective students. Well, Inuk was planning to go to Denmark, either at the urging of his parents or his own initiative, or probably some of both. So in 2011, at the age of 17, he went off to Denmark, and he was not seen after that at the competition. In fact, that was his last year competing, was 2011. I don't know if Inuk ever learned how to roll, but he never did participate in the rolling competition. Although with his skills on the ropes, I imagine it would be as easy as teaching Karen Marie Jensen how to roll, like I described in Dubcast 23. Well, going off to Denmark does not preclude one from continuing to kayak, and there's actually a operation called Kayak Copenhagen, QAJAQ Copenhagen, and that, like Kayak USA, is a recognized branch of Kanakatufjat in Greenland, and they have skin-on-frame kayaks and expertise on how to build skin-on-frame kayaks, and there's a location in downtown Copenhagen they have to store kayaks and take them out right on the canal and practice. And I'm aware that initially, back in the early 2000s or so, Kayak Copenhagen was quite active in sending people to the Greenland competition, and I believe Pavia Lumholt, who I described all the way back in Dubcast number 4, he was the president of Kayak Inuk when he lived in Greenland, but then when he got back to Copenhagen, he became the president of Kayak Copenhagen. So Inuk was in the situation of someone with very strong athletic abilities, looking for a place to apply them, and maybe he just fell into it, or maybe he gave it a lot of thought, but I can see that he was in the situation Maligiaq found himself in, having some real skills, but wanting to apply them in a field where you could get sufficient rewards for the time and effort you would put into training. Despite the attention that traditional Greenland kayaking has received worldwide from groups like Kayak USA, it's still, the reality is, this is not a mainstream pursuit. It doesn't even show up on mainstream radar. It's a niche sport with limited potential for someone who has got superior athletic ability. Well, Inuk did his last competition in 2011, went off to Copenhagen to school, and I kept going to the Greenland competitions after that. In 2016, I went to the competition, and Inuk was again not there. But later on, when I got back to Denmark and went to the Greenland in Tivoli Day at the Tivoli Amusement Park, all the Greenlanders in Denmark often come to that, and you see people you haven't seen in a while. And there, materializing out of the crowd, was Inuk Sigstad, a grown adult in his 20s, who could also speak English, so we had a conversation. And I told him I was still going to the competitions, and if he wanted to make an appearance and dust off his skills maybe, he's welcome to come. And he said, man, I could see in his eyes it was an interesting thought, but I didn't really expect him to show up the next year, and he didn't. But Inuk did not waste his athletic skills. He took the path that Maligiaq did not take, and if you would like to see what he does these days, all you need to do is type in Inuk Sigstad, I-N-U-K, first name, second name is S-I-E-G-S-T-A-D, Inuk Sigstad. And if you want to get right to the heart of things, it's Inuk Sigstad BMX, as in BMX bikes. I think he's a sponsored professional BMX biker. And I believe there are a couple dozen videos posted of him doing all sorts of amazing stunts on a BMX bike, including full 360-degree aerial flips at the top of the ramp. Now, I've hurt myself on the ropes here and there, but I haven't done anything that potentially dangerous. You know, turning upside down 3 or 4 feet over concrete, you risk serious paralysis if you mess that up. However, this is a mainstream pursuit. I believe BMX biking events are in the Olympics, and there is money to be made. So it's got a lot more potential than traditional Greenland sea kayaking. And that is what Inuk Sigstad did when he left kayaking. I have music by 3 siblings recorded when they were very young, and they had an act called the Olsen Kids. And they were doing sort of poppy sounding, you could call it bubblegum music, but I think it appealed to the children of Greenland. They had some hits back in the day. And I got a song here called Atuaunale Pugut, and that translates to "We are starting to no longer go to school," which I think that means, it's vacation time, summer vacation. We're out of school now. I imagine that's a topic children of just about all ages can identify with. So here is Atuaunale Pugut, originally done by the Olsen Kids. The song is called Atuaunale Pugut by the Olsen Kids, consisting of Ikiuna Olsen, Kutak Olsen, and Ivana Olsen. In 2017, I was in Copenhagen, Denmark at the Tivoli Amusement Park during their Greenland in Tivoli celebration, and one of the acts on the bill was the Olsen Kids. Although by that time they were no longer the Olsen Kids, they were the Olsen adults and had to sing with adult voices rather than kid voices, but I think it was a big nostalgia moment for all the Greenlanders there. So that song Atuaunale Pugut comes from a CD called Askipot, which had me baffled. I couldn't find that word in my Greenlandic dictionaries because it's not a Greenlandic word. Askipot is the Danish term for Cinderella. I don't think their CDs are in print. At least they're not available on atlanticmusic.gl. But there may be other places online that you can download samples of the Olsen Kids. Coming up in episode 35, tell you some more things that went on in Greenland. But I'm going to try a new experiment in how I bring that to you. So be ready for that next time on the Dubcast with Dubside.